So before we go on to the Q&A, so it's going to be the main part, so I want to talk a bit about artificial intelligence or AI, just so people know sort of roughly what it is. I will be honest, I am a social worker, so definitely not my field and not something that I'm expert in. I just want to give a brief overview just so people have an idea that we're on the same page. So generally, AI is a science of training machines to perform human tasks, so making machines more intelligent and sort of like emulates sort of human thinking. So currently we have what we call narrow AI, which is more task specific. So for example, being able to help with a personal assistant, so like Siri, Google Assistant, how like self-driving cars, so there's more sort of narrow AI duties. In the future, potentially, there's also something called general AI, which is more sort of represents human beings. So being able to have AI that's more intelligent, not specifically completing specific tasks, but they can be able to do more general things without having sort of dedicated to do only one thing. Also with AI, there's a lot of algorithms or neural networks to take in data and sort of outputting a desired results. So some of these can involve like human intervention. So in terms of being able to have structured data, so labeling data in order for a AI to analyze it. Other forms do not require human intervention, so they can actually self-modify and basically self-learn based on the data that they are given. We also have deep learning, which is AI, which is composed of multiple layers of algorithms. So some of them might be sort of one layer, other ones might be 3, 4, 5 layers deep, and those can do more complex and also take in more data as well. And also, when you think about the impact of AI on the labor market, there's lots of things to think about. There's lots of reports that have been issued. So, for example, how AI and automation of tasks are expected to reduce full-time workforce. So, having these AIs that can do specific tasks, that can reduce the amount of work that's required by people. And also leading to strategy with augmentation. So rather than having AI completely replace jobs, it's also a strategy where AI is used to enhance the ability for people to do more complex things. So for example, having AI that can do sort of manual labor, like data entry, that kind of stuff, that stuff can be done by an AI rather than having a human doing that. So when you think about sort of AI in the labor market, we always hear about like robots taking our jobs. That may not necessarily always be the case. It might be a fact of using AI to sort of augment and supplement what we already do. Also thinking about like how AI is likely to impact complex and thinking professions. So it's not just restricted to low skilled positions, but it can also impact more higher level, like high skilled positions. So for example, AI does also impact the legal services, so in terms of lawyers. So there's AI there, for example, that I read recently, that there's an AI actually beats lawyers in terms of being able to review contracts. So the AI was actually more effective in reviewing contracts compared to lawyers. So a lawyer may not be a profession that we normally would associate with like being severely impacted by AI, but it's still happening, and who knows what the future will look like. Other areas that can be impacted, like accounting, credit checks, HR, and also anything that requires decision making based on data, because an AI is very efficient in taking in data and making decisions based off that. So anything that requires decision making due to data can also be impacted. And the last point is also around when AI becomes more complicated, more complex, there's also issues of ethics and rights, and it can also really pull into question what is human. If you have an AI that can really emulate a person's mind and a person's brain, we can go into this really great area of like what exactly does it mean to be human. All right. So that was a really quick overview. I'm gonna and then this is just a graph of so it's one of the reports from the World Economic Forum. So it sort of compares 2018 and it projections to 2022 about the ratio of human-machine working hours based on these different tasks. So you can see across all levels, from reasoning and decision-making, which generally is associated with higher level thinking, to things like looking for receiving job-related information, administering, which are more lower level things. But I can see that the ratio of human to machine hours is there's generally a trend towards more and more machines completing these duties and fulfilling these hours. So it's good to sort of keep in mind when you're thinking about careers, sort of what kind of things do you want to do, what are the tasks associated with them, and which of those tasks can be more impacted by AI. I'm now going to move on to Ilham, who will introduce our alumni, because that will be the main parts of this session, and they can share their expertise, their knowledge, and their wisdom.
Thank you very much, Simon. And yeah, please join us in welcoming our two wonderful alumni who are here today. We have Mika Kimmins, who is currently a software engineer, data engineer at Apple, and is working out of California. Mika, and actually it's very interesting where their studies in history has led them, because while they were at University of Toronto, Mika initially studied in political science and then realized, and we will hear from Mika about that a little bit more later, but realized that this was not the program that was for them. So then decided to move into an honors bachelor's of science in computer science, mathematics, economics, in which they graduated with a high distinction, and also was involved in a lot of sports as well during their time at U of T, including varsity rowing team, also debate team, during unifinals, and a Rhodes Scholar too. And currently they're doing their MBA at Harvard Business School. So you see the Harvard sweater right there. So there you go. At Harvard Business School. So we wanted to welcome Mika because again, I think this would be of interest to a lot of students who are maybe coming from a non-technical background, and to hear how they can also move into a technical background if they so choose and work with AI, emerging AI technologies. We also have Emily Fan, who is based out of Toronto and working with Shopify. And wow, this is coincidental, but Emily Fan also studied in political science and graduated in political science, and then ended up doing a graduate degree in public policy and governance. So really heading towards a very political science and public administration type of career until they ended up working on a project on budgeting and creating budgeting systems with the city of Toronto, I think, yeah. And realized, oh wait, they actually liked the technical aspect of the job. And then went through a whole career switch with upskilling and retraining. So Emily can talk about some upskilling and retraining programs that they ended up taking in order to switch to working in a more tech field and a more AI field. And currently Emily's employed with Shopify and is working as a product manager. So again, product manager is also a profession that's emerging, and Emily can delve more into that. So you don't need to be a very high techy person in order to work as a product manager, or maybe know how to code. So really we want to give a warm welcome to Emily and Mika for joining us today. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's start off with a basic question first. Can you tell us very briefly about your career journey and what brought you to this point? And so we'll start with Emily first.
Yeah, thanks for the intro. So my career journey has been really interesting. As you mentioned, I studied in a field that isn't really relevant to where I am today, but I think it had a lot of input to what brought me here. So I started out, did my undergrad at Vic, did a specialist in political science, did the full degree in that. I was like, cool. Was really gearing up to work in the public service because I loved community building and being a part of my community. I thought, what better way to like spend my career than work in the public sector? So I worked at the City of Toronto for a few years in finance, and then decided I wanted to do a graduate degree. Did my graduate degree at London School of Economics, and studied public management and governance, and went back to the city. But this time in a different role. I was working on an IT project. And at the time, and still today, the processes in government are super manual and inefficient. So I had the opportunity to help build a budgeting application that would help to automate all of our processes and create more visibility around spending and our returns on our investments, and also ultimately increase transparency to taxpayers, because all that information is just was all over the place, very difficult to reason about. So started working on this project, working very closely with developers, wanting to learn how things were working in the back end, and actually like wanting to go in and like fix things myself. So me not having a technical background, I decided to take some courses online to basically start learning how to code, and I just loved it so much that I told myself this is what I want to do, and I want to better understand like how software actually works, and ultimately decided to leave a very comfortable job and, you know, my pension and everything at the City of Toronto to do a coding boot camp and move into tech. And it was a really big shift despite, you know, my existing career path. But ultimately, I ended up working at a startup, was, you know, got to learn from some amazing engineers, and eventually found my way into Shopify as a developer. And once I worked in engineering for a few years, decided to make the switch to product management, which is less technical, but depending on where you work, it requires various degrees of technical abilities. So that's where I am today. I work on internal productivity tools that help shape how people work at Shopify. And we're really focused on now with this move to remote, everybody is remote first at Shopify. How can we create tooling that's going to help improve employee productivity and ultimately help us grow faster?
Thank you, Lori. And Mika, I guess your origin story.
Hi, everyone. Before I start, I would like to see everyone's faces. So if it's okay with everybody, I would like to encourage everyone to turn on their cameras. It would be lovely. All right, great, awesome. Hi, so I'm Mika. I actually started at Vic with political science. I started my undergrad in 2008, right at the cusp of financial crisis. Not very dissimilar to the kind of times that everyone here is in, right? The world is in turmoil. We're not sure what's going on. That's the world that I entered in. So I was very much interested in political science because I wanted to understand sort of the macro levels of like what led us here and how we get out of here and how I position myself to get all of us out of here. That's kind of where the motivating factor for me to want to study political science. Now, 3 years into my undergrad, I was actually doing a senior thesis project with the late, why am I blanking? Yeah, a professor who, who allowed me to kind of just free float and write about things that I want to write and present it in political science, Canadian political science convention. But then I realized that everyone there, even political scientists, their research nowadays is very mathematical. And I realized once you're in grad school, even social science has to be very technical and mathematical. And then I realized that really the software, that's about the start of the mobile era app boom, right? App was all over the place. Everyone was talking about apps. And I was like, well, that sounds much more dynamic. That sounds like where I want to position myself in. And it looks like even if I do political science, I'll have to be technical anyway, because the world is becoming political. Technical. So I actually pivoted and started from year one in math and computer science. It did require a lot of courage to do that because I really didn't think of myself as a STEM girl. It's really funny though. My first reason for actually taking my first mathematics course in university was actually because my friend at the time and I thought the professor was hot. And that actually helped. Liking the prof helped to get through like the hard parts of the course.
It's a prof that makes a course.
Yes,
that's true.
It really does.
Yeah, I thought my college professor was handsome too, so I stuck with Econ 202.
So true. So yeah, in the end, I ended up doing another 4 years in undergrad, majored in computer science and mathematics. And I ended up graduating and going right into Apple. That's a different story. I don't want to take too much time, so I'll revisit it if you're curious how I ended up at my first gig in Apple. But yeah, so ever since then, I've been at Apple. And it's been a crazy journey. I've been at the start of the cusp of the virtual assistant boom, right? When I started at Apple, there was only Siri, and then now there's bunch of competitors out there, and the market is super hot, and it seems like it's just not going to decelerate anytime soon. Everyone's talking about voice integration with everything right now. Cars even need voice assistants. So yeah, I was lucky and I positioned myself at the right place at the right time, but also I kind of knew where the market was going. So I think it's very important for everyone here to kind of read the market, make some brave decisions. Yeah.
Thank you for going into that. So my second question is, so really it brings up what skills or what do you recommend students can do best to prepare for upcoming trends in AI? So Emily, if I can request that you maybe touch upon a little bit about the type of courses you have taken and what courses you'd recommend taking since you were involved in upskilling so that you could change from one career path to the next. And for Mika, it would be, if you can talk about more of your journey in Apple, because like you mentioned, that there was only Siri, and now there's just so many other competitors, just Siri. And what can students kind of do right now to prepare for that field of AI? So shall we start with Emily first?
Yeah, sure. I think Micah was spot on with just staying current with the market. And so not even like beginning from like courses and deciding like jumping into like a very specific, you know, narrow subject. I would say like read the news, read, you know, TechCrunch, and follow people on Twitter and that, you know, you find really interesting, who are thought leaders in this area, to just understand like where are the trends. There's something called Product Hunt, where you can see like new products that are emerging on the market and startups, and where you can really discover things that are really interesting to you. And I would say like that might be a good place to just like start and get the lay of the land and decide like what's really interesting to you if you really want to dive deep into a specific area. For me, I was really interested in app development. This was in 2010. And so I jumped in and did a coding boot camp, which specialized in full stack app development. And that was, you know, pretty high level, but actually a lot of the learning that I did was actually on my own. And so the most important thing I think to remember is like, yes, taking courses is really helpful, but it's only the beginning, and you really need to be resourceful at teaching yourself how to learn, and continuing to learn on your own and being independent, and rather than, you know, constantly relying on a course curriculum. I think the most important thing that employers look for too is like people who can learn quickly. So I'd recommend, if you're interested, just getting a good sense of the trends, what interests you, because that's really important as well for your career choices. And then yeah, learning, there's a lot of free resources out there too, so it doesn't have to be a major investment. There's lots of websites where you can learn online, great YouTube tutorials. I would say like start there, look at Reddit, figure out like what's interesting, and, you know, Google as much as you can. And if it's worth the investment to you to dive deeper, then I would look into additional certification.
Okay, and now Mika.
I will start with after I got hired at Apple. So at that time, Siri and the entire Apple stack was, Apple iOS stack was written in Objective-C and Java on the back end. So these are different kind of programming languages, and they all kind of belong to a paradigm of class of programming languages called objective-oriented programming languages. So that was the skill that I was kind of required to have and originally was hired for. Of course, it comes with some basic stats and artificial intelligence and deep learning that you learn in undergrad or grad level computer science programs. That's like your basis academic knowledge, but in terms of the technical skills required, those were the skills that they screened for. Now, Siri itself went through several revisions and rewrites in my tenure, and the industry, cutting edge of the industry in terms of the deep learning techniques keeps on changing, right? So when I started at Apple, something called Spark framework was just around the corner. And I remember Apple offering employees a course to take it for a week instead of going to work. So I took the course, and then that became huge. Now Spark is sort of the basis of the analytics layer for everybody, right? So the big banks, financial institution to like big corporations, we're talking, you know, Fortune 500 companies, they all use Spark as their kind of data analytics layer to understand what their business is doing. So I upskilled even at work. I had to kind of keep myself current, and in doing so kind of kept me in able to navigate myself in teams, even inside the company, right? There's internal dynamics and teams who are working on, you know, the next generation projects versus the projects that's in maintenance mode and they'll be sunsetted. So it's very important within company to kind of keep yourself current. And then now, a couple of years ago, there's another framework that was up and coming called scikit-learn and TensorFlow. And now that's like very much an industry standard for everyone who's trying to do deep learning. So now I had to kind of relearn that skill to position myself in the cutting edge of the team. So even inside work, I'm already technical. There has to be lots and lots of retraining that goes on. And that's just the way that technology is. It just moves really fast and innovation is very fast. So whether it be you be technical like me or be PM, you always have to be on top of the trend and be a voracious learner. What's interesting is that in tech, your hours are not that long. So if anyone's thinking about law school or like law school or med school, you know, your hours, you're going to be pulling 60, 70 hours a week. In tech, you really pull like 40, 50 at most. So the work-life balance is a little better. The reason really is that you really need to reinvest some of that extra time into upscaling yourself. So I think that's very important kind of mindset for everyone to have, especially since the entire world is becoming tech, right? Software is eating up the world. So whatever you do, investing some of your time from now on and becoming a lifelong learner would be very important.
All right, thank you for mentioning that. And I think the themes are the similar, like be a lifelong learner, and the desire and aptitude and the time we spent in lifelong learning will help you stay on top of the trends. So maybe we'll flip the question around a little bit. In your opinion, what type of jobs cannot be easily automated or should not be automated, whether you see it more generally or whether you see it in the places you work? So why don't we start with Mika? What jobs cannot be automated or should not be automated, in your opinion?
That's a really good question. So let me give you a quick anecdote. So the prevailing thought, I mean, in the AI disruption and software disrupting industry was already a prevailing kind of thought and question, you know, almost 10 years ago. And the consensus at that time was that there are jobs that are hard to automate, like being a lawyer. How are you going to understand the intricacies of court opinions, right? That was the prevailing thought, and everyone kind of took it as truth. Now, I actually joined a lab in U of T that actually believed otherwise. And you could actually detect people's sentiments, topical sentiments, based on whatever that was recorded. So one of my undergrad projects was to do sentiment analysis in parliamentary debate records in the Canadian Parliament. So that had preliminary success, and that actually is what got me hired at Apple. But that's a different story. But the point is now, you fast forward 10 years, and there are several competing legal research tools out there that employs deep learning to mine topical sentiments. So not only in a span of 10 years, the prevailing wisdom has been turned on its head, now these tools are readily available and started to already chip away at paralegal jobs. And not only that, the average salary for lawyers, newly minted lawyers, has been stagnant for the last 10 years. And the job market has become a lot more competitive for even lawyers. And it's no longer as lucrative as people thought it was about 10, 20 years ago. So that's a word of caution. Don't take it for granted, some of the prevailing wisdom that certain things cannot be automated. There will be a way that ingenious people can figure things out. So that's a little bit of word of caution. Now, whether something should be automated, something should not be automated, also is a prevailing wisdom, right? Like, we never thought that we would be running universities and learning completely online, and not yet we are doing that. Now, then someone might ask, why are we actually having, 10 different professors teaching the same thing in 10 different universities? You could have one professor recording it and sending it to everybody else. That probably works just as well. And now you have automated 9 jobs away, and that will happen. So do not take any prevailing wisdom as granted, would be what I would say.
All right, thank you, Emily.
Yeah, I thought that was a really interesting response. Like, I tend to agree. Like, I think eventually, I think if somebody really wanted to, they could replace, some kind of human decision-making capabilities or human abilities in some way. Whether that'll be adopted by people in the market is like a whole other question. But to go back to your question around like what I think like can't be replaced by AI is like things that require some kind of human connection and like relationship building. And so when I think about like the most important skill that that is required when you're like working within a team is like your people skills and your leadership skills. And if I can imagine like my manager being replaced by a robot, like no chance at all, I would not want to be working for a robot. And so I think that there's a level of like human connection and emotion that people need to work together in a workplace. And so I think that's one of the essential skills that like we really just can't replace. And I think humans are social beings, and we strive on these social connections. And so being really attuned to that, I think, is really important, especially now with this pandemic going on, and we're so much more further apart, and we're relying on other ways to connect with people, and it's a really hard time. So I would say like, yeah, like your emotional intelligence skills, leadership skills, people skills, your ability to like rally a team. Like I can't be excited by a robot about an idea. I can't be motivated by a robot or some kind of machine. So I think that's really important, especially when it comes to building companies that are able to retain employees and get a team together towards like a common goal and a target. And I think that like the other thing that's just really important is being able to understand, having the skill set to understand how all of these things, all this technology works is really important. Being in a position where you could potentially like be the builder or even just know what the possibilities are, I think is a really relevant skill to have. So on a more technical side, like I think it's always going to be important. I think the saying is like program or be programmed, and I think just it's true to some degree. But yeah, in general, my stance is that like you're never going to replace like a real human and emotions and connections like that. Although I think there are movies that kind of have that too, like you fall in love with a robot, which is possible, but that's my personal stance.
Okay, Thank you very much for sharing that. So we're going to open up the floor to student questions. You can, as Simon indicated, you can raise your Zoom hand or you can put it on the chat. Please be aware that if you raise your Zoom hand, you can ask a question live and your voice will be recorded. Or you can also put your question in the chat and we will be watching the chat room and put forward the question to Mika or Emily. So yeah, anybody has a question, please feel free to put up your hand or put it in the chat right now.
If you did, Tala, do you want to go first?
Yeah, thank you for both being here. I have a question that's general to both of you, but I also had a specific question more towards Mika because actually a few days ago when the iPhone 12 and the HomePod were launched, my dad and I were watching the entire video and we love Apple, but also when I was watching it, I was seeing how the HomePod was they were showing this like video of how it was assembled and how it was created and how you can like put two in one home and then stuff like that, and it was really interesting. So I was wondering what kind of what's your daily job? What do you do day to day? What were the qualifications for Apple? How did you know you wanted to work in Apple? And then a question general for both of you are how did you know you wanted to work in technology and AI? What was interesting and what qualifications did you need, like in your interviews, in your resume? Yeah, like your path.
I'll let Emily go first, and then I'll come to.
Okay, cool. I can't speak to all the cool stuff that Apple's shipping, but I will speak to yeah, what motivated me to get into technology, what got my foot in the door, and yeah, I'll start there. In terms of just like what motivated me, I was working in a very traditional industry in government. It was a mix of like just understanding the market trends, but also wanting to like open up more opportunities for myself in terms of reskilling and actually diving deep into a more technical discipline. So what got my foot in the door was a combination of like technical skills, like you have to do coding interviews, you have to like at a minimum level like understand how software works if you want to move into a technical role. The other really important piece that got my foot in the door was networking, and I think that this can be downplayed, but it is something that can make your life so much easier just in terms of facilitating initial introductions with employers or anyone who would, you would potentially be working with down the road. And so things that I did after I completed my coding courses was that I actually formed two community groups that I was really passionate about. The first one was Civic Tech Toronto, and it was focused on using technology and design for the purposes of improving the public good in Toronto. And we had weekly meetups where I was able to connect with other technologists who were interested in the same kind of issues, but understanding it through a technology lens. It opened up a ton of doors for me, just in terms of being able to like talk to companies and seeing if they were interested in sponsoring our community group, reaching out to prospective venues and seeing if they would be willing to host us for a meetup or something like that. I know it's a little bit harder now with the pandemic. And then the other community group I founded was Rails Girls Toronto. So the framework that I was learning on for web development was Ruby on Rails. I wanted to continue learning that in a very like inclusive and open environment. And so I started Rails Girls Toronto and met a bunch of other developers who were amazing to work side by side with. And eventually like Rails Girls was what introduced me to recruiters at Shopify. And they were like, we're really interested in what you're doing in this space, just in the tech community. Why don't we have you in for an interview? And that opened the door for me. And so, yeah, it was a combination of like the technical skills, but also like networking. And you got to go out there. And if you don't have like the opportunities in front of you, you have to find ways to create the opportunities for yourself.
Cool. That was very interesting. Thank you for the story. So I will kind of, try to address those two questions in one. So my day-to-day life is a little bit of mix of tech and soft skills always, right? So I work in Siri, the AI side, right? So we have to, so let's see, let's wind it back. In the morning, I usually read my daily reports and the reports that I generate for the executives. So I have a couple dashboards and I built my couple dashboards and metrics that kind of tells us the health of Siri system all across the world. It's actually quite interesting. So we track, because Siri, Alexa, any of these devices, they require a round trip to the server. We kind of know how many people are using it and you know how people like our new operating system, right? So, I mean, everything is linked to the App Store. We can kind of pull these metrics and do some really interesting stats on it. So I have a couple dashboards that go straight up to the VP and CEO levels. So I kind of check up on some of these numbers. And then I usually, there are sort of project management tools that we use in tech. Everybody in tech uses it. Something called Agile Method, which probably Emily knows everything about, which is kind of a way to track how everyone's doing and where everyone's going and what everyone's blockers are. So that's like what we call stand up, and I do a meeting with my team members. And then I usually, and then I do different things. So some days I would be working on training a new model for a new language. So sometimes, you know, English words change and we have to generate a new, what we call deep learning models, which is like the brains of the artificial intelligence system. So I train the models, evaluate them, and deploy them. So that's kind of my day. Sometimes you know, to train the new models, I need new data points. Then I would be having lengthy discussions with the legal team about what is legal to collect and what is not legal to collect. And then I would then engage my peer teams. I work in AI division, but there are different divisions in Apple. So I would, you know, reach out to my peer teams in iOS who writes the operating system for the iPhone, and talk about what are the new features coming up, or what are the new features that they're going to be getting rid of, right? That's also important. So we coordinate these things. Sometimes, actually, HomePod is actually a really good example. I worked so much on HomePod. Oh my God. Like, oh my God, the start of working on HomePod was 2016 for me. And it's been a long process. Yeah, so I reach out to hardware people and talk about, we try different models, how many speakers do we put in HomePods, right? And depending on that, how do we target the directionality? Like HomePod is here, people are talking here, and people are talking here simultaneously. How do we isolate the noise? We talk about that from my machine learning perspective, and then we talk about, from a hardware perspective, how we can actually meld these things together. Yeah, and sometimes I would be speaking to management about, these are the things that we need to actually change in hardware or change in software. This will require us to have a data center somewhere, or add another additional component to this HomePod. And they have their own number crunchers who are like, okay, well, adding this another speaker would cost us, like $10 more per HomePod, based on our pricing model. Can we do that? And how many will we sell? How many will we not sell? We kind of run the numbers. And then, yeah, there has to be that kind of coordination that comes up. I don't make the money decisions, but I'm privy to that money decision because I need to push what I need in my product forward. So those are some of the day-to-day tasks. More of the minute things that we do are like specific feature implementation talk. So earlier, several years ago, Siri also had a lot of hard-coded responses, right? So if someone says I am X, usually Siri defaults to something like, oh, that's cool with me, right? Then we had a bad incident where someone was not happy of Siri's response. It said, hey Siri, I'm gay and I want to kill myself. And Siri defaulted to fine with me. So, you know, that's a very bad use case. And, you know, because it's an artificially intelligent being and we don't actually control what comes out on the other end, you know, that's kind of the point of deep learning. You kind of don't know what happens in the middle layers and you just get an output. These things happen and you need an advocate for some of these regressions to be like, okay, we really need to rejig the labels and we really need to actually go into it and manually change some of these things around. So I can be sometimes an advocate saying like, okay, we're gonna need to dedicate, you know, a team of 5 people a month to figure this out. And you're gonna have to pay us to do that. I kind of pitch those things. And so my handwork went into crafting a response for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline. So these are like some interesting things that happens. I can go way more into details, but I think I'm taking up too much time, so I'll stop here.
Oh, no, don't worry about that. It's no, thank you for answering it in such detail. So really the key messages to take away are that, first of all, you got to put yourself out there. You got to try new things. You got to reframe a solution. If something is not working, you can't keep at it year after year after year. Issues and problems will come up. You have to find another way to get around it, right? And networking is so important. So not only just going to your classes and doing your classes, but doing things on the side, whether that means founding community groups, participating actively in hack nights and hackathons, or retraining, and also talking to different people like Mika does, the legal team, the hardware team, this team, and then working on one project for years. It takes years to come to fruition, and you have to work with so many different people. So there are a lot of soft and transferable skills that we're hearing as well, right? The ability to network and work with so many different people, the ability to pivot as well quickly. So thank you so much to do that, for emphasizing all these points that we do keep making in our career advising sessions as well. Are there, is there another question from a student?
Yeah, so maybe Ray. I saw that he put his hand first. So Ray, then Robert, and then I saw Faye sort of put her hand up as well.
Yes, perfect. So 3 more questions coming. Awesome.
Okay. Hi, my name is Ray. I'm a 4th year student at U of T. I just want to say, you know, it was really exciting stories to hear from both Mika and Emily, starting from a non-tech background into a tech field. And my question is, if you want to start, you know, exploring tech and from maybe you don't know that much about tech at the beginning, where would you recommend us to start from? Because I know that you mentioned so much about different technologies like Sparks, you know, scikit-learns, deep learning, neural network. You know, where do we start? What's a good starting point?
So that really depends on what your stated sort of tech goals are. So there are many different jobs and roles in tech, right? You can be a product manager who makes sure that, you know, a project comes to fruition with, you know, herding the cats. I am an engineer and I'm like, I need this feature, I'm gonna go and work on it. And, you know, project manager is the person who pulls me back and be like, oh, okay, but we need to ship this feature, so you're gonna prioritize this first. That's kind of a project managerial role. So there's that role, and that requires a different skill set than me, which is an IC, what we call IC, which is individual tech contributor, which actually touches like the very details of the product. And there's also a different role called product manager, right? So these are people who would be like, okay, what are the essential features we need and how do we sell this feature and how much money do we put to develop these features, right? So that's a different role. And there's UI UX people who are like, okay, but this is how it should look and this is how it should feel. right? Siri should talk in this manner, not that manner. Siri button should look like that, not this. I know you want to have a spinning GIF icon, but you can't do that because that would look really bad. Those are the UI UX people who pull us back and be like, okay, these are the things. And that's also a very different skill set. So Ray, what are like sort of the fields in tech that interest you?
I mean, I am a math student and statistics student, so I do have like some sort of stats background. But you know, if I want to, you know, say pursue something interesting, like working at a tech company, developing something or designing something, I don't think I have that exposure in my courses or in school. So I'm just wondering, where can I start to developing those skills?
Sure. So you're on actually a really good track. So math and stats lend yourself really good to data science positions, right? So you have a very good way into any of these tech functions. So you know, R is a very easy way to kind of get your foot in, knowing R and being able to do a lot of, you know, regressions and analysis. That's like a step one. But also, you would want to broaden yourself into the more recent tools, that's newfangled tools that everyone in the industry is pivoting towards. So yeah, I highly recommend you get started with Python, because Python is a very good entry point for data scientists. Then, so platforms like TensorFlow or scikit-learn is basically an API on top of Python. So Python is not a bad place to start. So learn Python and then start learning some of these other APIs. There's a lot of online tutorials out there. Pick a couple, see if they work with you, see if they don't, and take it from there. Also, don't sell yourself short. You could get a little job that kind of makes you do data science things and then get on the job training as well. But also, it's hard. Don't pick a company that will just grind you down, you know, work you to the bones and not give you time to actually upskill yourself. So it's very important, if you're not going to go to grad school and you're going to jump right into the industry, you should take your time to figure out a company that will allow future growth trajectories, because a career is a marathon. It's not a sprint. We all have 30, 20 years ahead of us. So you want to get yourself into a company and a team that will actually allow you to learn more of these tools as you go on, and find a company and organization that stays relevant.
Thank you for the advice. That was really helpful.
Yeah, if I could just add, like, in terms of figuring out what your goals are, like if you have a set type of role in mind, like becoming a data scientist, then I definitely would recommend like diving more deep into what are the different technologies that data scientists use. And if maybe some folks are a little bit more open-minded or like still a little bit unsure about which path to take, like one thing that I think could be really helpful is just diving deep and like starting a project and like building something. And I think that'll expose you, like find a problem that you're interested in, that you want to solve, and figure out a way to use technology to solve that problem. And I think that'll expose you to like all these different aspects of what goes into technology. And if you really enjoy working with the data, then maybe that's something to explore further. If you really enjoyed designing out the whole user experience and the user interface, then that's great. If you enjoyed like prioritizing like exactly, you know, which problems you want to solve and deciding like what features you wanted to build in, that maybe product management is your thing. And I think that'll give you a good overview in terms of like how to build some a piece of technology, and like you can do a little bit of everything to find what you enjoy the most. And the other thing is like learning is a theme that's come up. You always have to continue learning, and like maybe it's worth reflecting how you best learn, and finding the mediums or like that you really enjoy learning with. So if you listen to podcasts all the time, maybe you should start, listening to some podcasts about data or AI. Or if you enjoy like visual learning, then maybe you could watch some YouTube videos. If you like reading, like pick up some books and really, understand like how you learn best and make it super easy for yourself to learn that new thing.
Thank you for the advice, Emily.
Well, thank you. So maybe we'll move on to Robert, then Faye after.
Okay, cool. I think there's, well, first of all, I'm in my third year studying computer science, and I've actually done a few internships in the engineering industry, and I'm moving into research and hopefully grad school. So my question is a little bit loaded in the sense that of course, like you guys are of course aware that AI itself, and the training process in machine learning is very resource intensive. And in the past, there have been environmental concerns about the bandwidth capacity as well as the emissions of data centers. So as the industry moves from narrow to general AI, how would you say we should be balancing the environmental concerns and the resource consumption of AI?
Yeah, that is a really great question. And I think that I agree, AI is one aspect of technology that is creating an impact on our environment. And it doesn't stop just there. And I think that moving forward, we need to, companies need to prioritize this and see it as a competitive advantage. And so not necessarily related to AI, but some of the things that Shopify has done is everything that's built into our product, we try to make we take the environment into consideration for every step along the way. And so we recently released an app that also helps our consumers keep track of their carbon footprint whenever they buy a product online, for example, and they can see what the carbon emissions are from shipping their product from one store to for their purchase to receive that product. And one of the things we've also done is started a major fund to actually that's dedicated towards funding this research and ensuring that our company gets to a point where we're carbon neutral. I think seeing major players in the tech industry do that and have that be a competitive advantage in attracting talent as well as enticing people to go with their brand is really important moving forward. And ultimately, I think that companies need to see the benefit of that. Sometimes the focus is a little bit too much on the bottom line and profitability, but I think that we actually need to change the mindset of CEOs and leaders across the tech industry to say yeah, you can actually continue to be profitable and make more money by having actually thought about these environmental concerns as well. So I think there needs to be a little bit of a shift there, which is why, again, it's so important for people who are not just focused on the technology and the money, but people who also are concerned about being a citizen and what's good for the world and understanding the broader systemic issues that are related to tech is really important.
I see. I guess the same question to Mika, I would probably add that Siri is very centralized, right? It requires communication with the server.
Right, that's actually a really good question, and I was actually going to go there. So
right.
Everyone have probably heard of something called cloud computing, right? Which is you do all of the data warehousing and processing at the cloud level. So everything goes to a data center and out. Yeah, right, there is no cloud. It's someone else's computer, somewhere else. Giant rows of computers, right? So that's been kind of the industry trend for the last 12, 13 years. However, Apple's actually part and parcel in kind of effort to actually dismantle the cloud. We don't want the cloud. And we don't want the responsibility of warehousing data securely in the cloud, because still, even with very, very high level security, it can be compromised, because there are powerful interests out there who really want to compromise our data centers, right? Like, we last year found that one of our server rack equipment we bought from a supplier in China looked like everything was fine and it functioned fine, but we got a tip from the FBI and the intelligence agencies that one of the chips was actually compromised and had bad code, and we have to take it out of circulation. So we had a fire drill where we had to like move the data frantically and get those effective racks out of service. So, you know, there's no such thing as perfect cloud. And Apple doesn't actually, the way that our revenue model is structured is we don't really make money out of cloud operations, right? We're very different from Facebook, who basically its entire business model is cloud. So we've been actually trying to move into what's called edge computing. So cloud computing versus edge computing. Edge computing, if you're a computer scientist, you know, like this, that's the edge of a graph, that's your personal devices. So we've been on a very multifaceted effort to offload any of the artificial intelligent operations we do back into your phone, so that the data actually doesn't have to travel back and forth. It just lives on your device and gets forgotten. So some of the things that you know that exists on your edge computing that are that has our intelligence on it were things like Face ID, right? That uses facial recognition and artificial intelligence, and that doesn't come to our servers. That just lives in your device. And that actually enabled a lot of very interesting things like Snapchat, right? Like Snapchat now recognizes your face and does all the computations within your phone. So we're actually trying to move away from the server model. And I think that's actually where the future growth trajectory will be. And that actually will decrease our carbon footprint. Not only that though, note that the reason artificial intelligence or like any of these deep learning techniques is popular is because it is getting us to be more intelligent as human beings and species, right? You know, the age of Walmart may have been a mistake, and maybe the age of Amazon and Shopify is actually not that bad, right? In terms of carbon footprint. As we displace something, a very carbon intensive old industry with the new ones, we find ways to be a lot more smart about it. So if you look at our net carbon footprint, we also have to think about the ways in which we save on it, right? The Zoom calls is actually a very good example, right? We don't have to go everywhere anymore. We are actually dramatically lowering our carbon footprint. So yeah, I think we should put all those things in context.
So we will move on to Faye's question as well. So Faye, you're up.
Hello, I'm Faye. I'm a third-year computer science student, and I'm actually on my PEY internship year, so I'm not in school right now. And I have a question for Emily, and then a question for both of you. So to Emily, you said that you went from being a programmer, correct, to a product manager. So how was that transition like? Like, what qualifications, training, and experience did you find were helpful or needed to make that transition? And for both of you, this pandemic has really showed that I think the industries that can really prevail are ones who can digitize their experience. For example, like Shopify is online shopping. So how do you, or through this pandemic, how have you seen the company's growth accelerate, and how has that impacted hiring or jobs at your companies? Thank you.
Cool, great question. Just on the question of transitioning from a developer to a product manager, I actually found myself happened very organically. I started on a very small team with just 4 developers and no designers, no PMs. We were forced to be super scrappy and in terms of deciding like exactly what our product vision was, how we prioritize things, and doing all the user research ourselves, doing all the designs ourselves. And so being on a team where we basically had very limited resources, I was forced to wear multiple hats. And one of the hats that needed to be worn that I think helped to accelerate our team was having someone who played the product manager role. So I actually ended up doing both roles for quite a bit of time. And eventually I learned to really like it. And I liked how I could be a lot more user facing. As you can tell, I'm fairly extroverted. I get a lot of energy from other folks, and I just, wasn't sure if I wanted to continue down the IC individual contributor route or be more of a people person. So eventually I think it was my director who was like, hey, Emily, like you're doing a great job of this. Is this what you want to do? Because if you want to make this transition, I'll support you. So finding like a sponsor within the organization who also saw the potential there was super helpful. And he helped me make that transition internally. And so often like what happens at Shopify is like, if there's another role that you're interested in doing, you just start doing the role and then eventually, the title will come. So that was where I wanted to take my career long-term and was able to get into that space. And sorry, I'm blanking on your second question. Can you just remind me?
The second one is about like how the pandemic now, like a lot of these experiences have to be taken online. So how do you feel like that affected your company in terms of like accelerating the growth or even like hiring for new positions because of this growth? Things like that.
Totally.
Have changed.
Yeah, so what we're seeing at Shopify is like everything that we thought would happen in 10 years to the e-commerce industry is happening right now. So many people are flocking online for their purchases. A lot of what was already on our roadmap is now prioritized like today. And so it's also that now that we've moved to remote first, like we've been able to hire an amazing, broaden our talent pool for like where we hire instead of having to relocate folks to like Ottawa or Toronto or Vancouver, like we can hire people from anywhere around the world. So in terms of like hiring, like it's just opened up a lot of doors for us. And in terms of like our internal, like how we work at Shopify, which is what I'm focused on, like it's forced us to really rely heavily on a lot of our tooling to help document decisions or things that like conversations that would normally happen informally in like meeting rooms within offices aren't captured anywhere. And that makes it super difficult to have full transparency on and context on certain decisions that are made. It slows us down when like that information isn't actually captured anywhere. So yeah, like Micah was talking about agile methodology, and we have our own methodology at Shopify that we use. It sounds super cheesy. It's called Getting Shit Done, GSD, but we have like an entire tool just based on like capturing all the details of our product requirements and understanding where things are. And so we've really relied a lot more on our technology to even just like help accelerate how we work internally and how employees communicate with each other within the company.
Hey, thank you very much for answering those questions in such detail. So we have another question from Iris, and it's actually 3 questions. So the first two are directed at Mika. So your journey from UFT to Apple, I believe you started an internship first and then you moved into a full-time role there. And are there less technical roles that Apple Park has within, Apple Park in California? Like, do they have less technical roles? Because I think you were alluding to it earlier when we were having a pre-panel chat. So we'll start with Mika first, and then I'll put out the third question that could apply for both the panelists here.
Absolutely. So yeah, Apple Park is gorgeous. Oh my God. Anyways, let's see. Yes, tech is not just about IC's coding. We have product designers, UI, UX researchers, and EPMs, engineering product managers. So Absolutely. There are roles that we hire in for. The only restriction, if you want to be at Cupertino headquarters, is that you have to, if you're not an American, you will need a technical visa, right? H-1B visa. Apple will pay for that visa and sponsor you through the whole process. However, you would need a technical degree. So it should be a STEM degree in order to get a visa into the US. I know that's kind of, it is what it is. It is America. They are not that great with their immigration policy. So yeah, but definitely we hire less technical positions, and definitely we do sponsor them. You just have to be able to produce a STEM degree for the immigrations and custom purposes. Yeah, and we have lots and lots of UI UX people. Actually more so than other companies, right? So like, unlike Google, whose operations are like Gmail, and Gmail interface hasn't really changed for how many years? It's kind of ugly in my opinion. Right, and Apple is design first. You know, our approach has always been combining the soft skills and the hard skills. So yeah, we do hire a lot, and actually, alluding to what was it, Faye's question about the pandemic, we've been actually accelerating hiring even more because yeah, that's a very good question, because I remember a couple of years ago I was actually advising Apple when Apple was trying to open up their R&D office in Canada for the first time. And I actually went out to Ottawa several times to get the operations up and running. So we do have a small R&D office in Ottawa, in Canada. Yeah, but so the old way of operating was we build an office, we get employees in, we get a secure location where people are all inside, free from industrial espionage. That was our kind of operating model. And now we've completely reverted to like, went into the remote model. So yeah, we've actually picked up pace of hiring. And there's a lot of people who we're now onboarding. Our model is not a completely remote model. Our model is like a hybrid model where everyone has like their home-based satellite office that they're kind of close to. So, you know, Ottawa office, you know, in, 50 to 100 kilometer radius of the Ottawa office, you would be living and working from home. That's kind of because Apple requires you to get your hands on new devices, which they consider a top secret, and you kind of have to go in to work on them and do like actual validation work on them. So yeah, we are on kind of like a modified level. But yeah, if you want to come to Apple Park, talk to me later, because Apple Park is great. It's like a wonderland. It's really fun.
I think you'll have a lineup of people want to talk to you about Apple Park. So just be ready for that.
My question. Thank you so much for answering my questions, Mika. I've been to Apple Park 3 times and I loved it every time I went.
Amazing. Emily, same question for you as well from Iris, that how has hiring for new graduates, student interns, full-time positions been impacted by COVID-19 at Shopify? Or your operations been impacted as well at Shopify?
Yeah, I don't, hiring is actually, I'm not sure if it's picked up, but it definitely hasn't gone down. We always have a number of interns that are onboarded every quarter. And yeah, even within my team, like we're always bringing on new interns. I think that's a really important aspect of like how we continue to build for the long term at Shopify, is like bringing in new talent. And also we're, something that's really important to us is diversity and inclusion and belonging. And like, we know that there's a ton of those issues in tech right now. And I think that like bringing in younger folks, even from like non-technical backgrounds, is really important too. And one of the programs that we ran last year was actually something called Welcome Back program. And it was geared towards people who actually hadn't been coding for a few years and wanted to get back into the field at any point in their career. And so we had like people who had, 20, 30 years of experience wanting to get back into coding, and they were able to go through a 6-month course. It was like a internal program, and they got placed within a team. And I believe like 90% of the people brought into that program were hired on full time. And so, yeah, like the internship programs, always super important for internal growth and like long-term planning for the company.
Thank you very much to Mika and Emily. We want to give a big applause to them, but it will be a virtual reaction applause. So thank you very much for staying with us over the lunch hour in Eastern Standard Time, and for giving all the detailed answers and insights. And thank you to the students as well for being such an engaged audience and for bringing in so many great questions. Simon will be sending out an email afterwards that will have the links of what we talked about today, because I know I was shooting out a lot of links in the chat room, and also connecting for further information as well if you want to find out more, for example, about Apple Park. And Simon, I think you have the link for the evaluation too, right? That we will be posting as well. So Simon also has a link to the evaluation form in the chat room here. So we please encourage you to fill it out, because this is the first time we have ever offered the session. So we want to know what worked with the content, what more we could have covered that we didn't today, and how we can make it more better and more responsive to your needs. And if you fill it out, you can be entered for a draw to win one of two $50 gift card of your choice at the end of the semester. So yeah, any other final thoughts that our panelists Emily and Mika want to add before we leave for today?
I just want to say, it's probably a very disorienting time for everyone with Zoom University, and especially for those who are going to be graduating next year, or this year, I guess, at the end of this academic year. With change comes hardship, but also opportunities, right? I was in university in the great depths of the Great Recession, and a lot of new things came out of there. So I think you're in a very interesting time. Don't despair, just keep on at it.
Yeah, I definitely want to echo that sentiment, and also look at some of the new problems that have come up because of this pandemic, because there could be really interesting new opportunities in those spaces as well.
Absolutely. Okay, thank you very much. So this wraps up our wonderful informative AI for STEM session today. Please fill out the evaluation. We will also in the winter semester do an AI for more humanities type of job markets and professions as well, but that's happening in the winter semester. So thank you, wishing you guys all a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Thank you, bye-bye now.
Thanks everyone. Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Mika.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Happy Friday. Have a great weekend, everyone.